Hi guys, my name is Shane Cuthbert. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to get a little bit deeper and discuss in more depth, more detail, the relationship between the inner parent and the inner child, okay? Let's firstly look at the dynamic between parents and children, okay? The dynamic between adults and children. Really what we want to do is we want to give our inner child permission to break free from that shell, okay? We want them to get rid of those problems. So we're going to have to learn about the dynamic between, adults and children, our parent and our child, so that our child can break free. The relationship between our inner parent and our inner child is really what creates our unconscious conditioning. That relationship, now that we're aware of it, is really what is making all of our decisions day in and day out, okay? It's what's pushing and pulling us in certain directions. Now we understand that, we know that we need to build a better relationship. Now in the last lesson, I said that we're going to talk a little bit about praise, okay, specifically. So the question is how do we condition that inner child? Okay, now condition that inner child, obviously we have to communicate certain things to that child. What we're going to learn now is how to communicate praise to that child so that we are going to be able to make those long-lasting effects. I'd like to share with you some studies that have been done, okay, and these studies have been done by Carol Dweck, who is a professor at Stanford University. And these studies have been repeated in not only children but in adults as well, and have been shown in both cases to have very similar results. So what Carol Dweck and her associates did was they got a group of children, okay, a bunch of children, a group of 10-year-olds. They gave them all a series of puzzles. The puzzles that they gave those children, they knew that those specific puzzles were well within, okay, the ability of those children, okay? So these were puzzles that these children had the ability to complete. Now what they did is they set these children up essentially to achieve a successful outcome, okay? They knew that they would be able to complete these puzzles, so they knew that all of these children, because of their level of ability, were going to achieve a successful outcome when it came to finishing the puzzle. Now the kids were then divided into two separate groups, okay? There was 2 kids in group A, 2 kids in group B. The kids in group A were taken aside after the puzzle was completed. They were giving praise. They were praised for their intelligence. They were told, look, you did really well. We can't believe you achieved that. It's outstanding. It's amazing. You're so good. You achieved really, really great results, and you are, basically really good. They really focused on praising those 2 children in group A. Now the children in group B, they were taken aside and they were praised as well, okay? They were told that you did a good job, but they were praised very differently. Now, can you guess what they might have been told instead? Each of these individuals, okay, so each of these children now, after having completed that first task and getting, 2 different types of praise, they were then offered the opportunity to do another puzzle, okay, a harder puzzle. And they were told that it would be a good opportunity to stretch yourself and grow. They were aware that the next puzzle was going to be harder. They said, look, this next puzzle is going to be harder. And among the children in group A that were praised for their intelligence, okay, 67% of the children in group A didn't take the challenge. So of group A, the children that were praised and rewarded and told that they were, God's gift, they were exceptional, they were brainiacs, they were awesome. After being told that and being praised, almost overwhelmingly praised, 67% of them chose not to take the challenge. Now that's not surprising because we know that children usually prefer, and adults usually prefer, the path of less resistance, okay? We don't usually like challenging ourselves if we can help it. Likewise, our own inner child also chooses the path of less resistance, and it also chooses not to step out of its comfort zone either. We usually choose something that, is safe and is familiar. But here's the really interesting part. Among those children in group B that were praised differently, 92% of them chose to do the harder puzzle. Okay, 92% of those children actually decided to take on the harder challenge. Now, because the general rule is that children prefer to take the path of less resistance, how astounding is that 92% of these kids chose to take the harder challenge? What happened next was all of the children, okay, whether they liked it or not, were now given a much harder task, okay? So this time it wasn't a choice. They were giving a much harder puzzle, okay, a much harder challenge. So the researchers really gave them a puzzle that was well outside their level of ability, okay? So this was something that they expected the children not to be able to actually complete or finish. This time, in this test, they were set up to experience failure. Interestingly enough, though, is the children in Group B that were praised differently, they worked harder, they enjoyed it more, and they showed less resistance. However, interestingly enough, those kids in Group A that were praised for their intelligence did what most kids do when they sort of, don't get what they want or they're not achieving the results they want. They started getting frustrated with themselves and they gave up quite easily. Now, here's something that, is again, another common thing with children is what happens is when the parents have these, really intelligent kids, their expectations on those kids are a lot higher. And the parents get frustrated when their children aren't performing well. Although really, what we all do, and we're all guilty of doing this at some point or another in our lives, is that when something is challenging and it's quite difficult, we naturally want to give up, okay? We aren't naturally geared towards, challenges. We just naturally want to give up. Anyway, the results showed that all children actually failed the test. So there wasn't actually anybody that actually made it through the test. As I said before, they were set up to fail. Okay, so this was a puzzle. This was something that was outside of their natural abilities to do, and they all experienced failure at that point. But what they really wanted to study is what would that impact of that failure do to the children psychologically moving forward. So what they did is they created a final test, one last test, another puzzle, and this one had the exact same difficulty as that first puzzle, okay? So this was something, again, well within their ability to achieve, and there was no reason that, to suspect that any of them should fail, okay? This was something that all of these students should have been able to achieve. Interestingly enough, the children in Group B actually scored 30% higher, okay, when completing this task than they did originally when they did it the first time around. Something with the exact same level of difficulty, but they have, they've been praised differently and they've actually achieved better results than they did initially. That experience of failure had actually caused those children to become stronger, and it also motivated them to work harder. However, the children in Group A that had been praised for intelligence, they scored 20% lower than their first original test. Same difficulty level, same level of ability, and they actually scored 20% under what they did when they first did the very first test, the very first study. So the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, isn't necessarily true. Sometimes it can actually make us stronger, that's correct, okay? But for some people, it actually has the opposite effect, okay? It can actually make you weaker. Sometimes those painful experiences, and those traumas, those experiences of failure, they actually make it more difficult for us moving forward and moving ahead. Now, the good thing for us moving forward, though, is we are actually now, as a result of knowing this, we're able to pinpoint those exact moments where something is either going to make us weaker or make us stronger. Okay, so we're going to know when we're having those pivotal moments, and we're going to learn how exactly to give ourselves praise in future moving forward so that we have the ability to become stronger instead of becoming weaker. Now, those children in Group A, they were originally praised the way that most children are praised. You know, when they learn to walk or do a handstand or, get an A in science class or, achieve whatever it is that they're achieving. We all are guilty of really praising children that way. We are conditioning them to want to achieve better results, greater results. The other thing that we know now is the way that we are praised or criticised growing up as a child is not only going to shape who we are, as adults, but it's conditioning that inner parent. It's conditioning, that inner parent that's going to tell us what we can and can't do. So as we get older, we keep either praising or criticising ourselves in the exact same way, that we were praised and criticised as children. When those children were praised for their intelligence, they were temporarily conditioned to have a fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is the assumption that the way we are is the way we will always be, okay? And there's no ability for us to change that mindset, okay? It's fixed, it's got a lock on it. So whether you're good or bad at something, okay, your mindset about that situation or that task is fixed. Most people go through life with a fixed mindset. Those people that have, fixed mindsets choose to pursue their strengths and they avoid their weaknesses. So let's say, for example, you sit down with a child and you ask it a simple question, okay? You say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And let's say, for the example, this child, really wants to be a pilot. What they're going to do before they answer that question, okay, they're thinking of being a pilot. They want to sort of blurt that out. But momentarily, and this happens really, really quickly, their mind goes back to, their inner list of cans, okay? So it's going back to their childhood, it's going through their past experiences, and it's quickly going to evaluate whether or not being a pilot is something that, is actually sort of possible. Is that on their list of cans? So they're going to see if being a pilot is actually really something that is a part of their identity. Is their identity going to allow them becoming a pilot? Let's say, for example, that this child's past experiences have taught them that they are no good at maths. That same moment that child wants to say that it wants to be a pilot, it's going to quickly open up that book, see that it's no good at maths, and therefore, by definition, cannot be a pilot anymore. When the child looks into the future, okay, knowing that it can't do maths, the inner parent saying, well, you don't know maths. You're no good at maths, so you can't be a pilot. So what you'll see is you'll have this child that says, oh, I really want to be a pilot, but I'm not really good at maths, so I don't know, maybe I'll be, a cleaner like my dad, or, it might choose something that's more in line with its identity, okay, with who it is, based on those past experiences. That child has a fixed mindset, okay? It doesn't see that it has the ability to change or do anything or be anybody that it wants to be. The opposite of a fixed mindset is something actually called a growth mindset. So let's say in another example, you find another child and this child has a growth mindset, okay? So completely different. Now you ask this child the exact same question, but they've had the exact same past experiences, okay? So they're no good at maths either. Once again, they go, I'd love to be a pilot, but, they get out that book of cans and, oh, yep, I'm no good at maths. Only this time the difference is when they look into the future, that inner parent that has been programmed very differently has a very different answer for that inner child. Okay, so in the first example, that inner parent was saying, well, you're no good at maths, so you can't be a pilot, bad luck. This time, that inner parent is a voice of permission. That inner parent is going to have a very different, obviously you've got the growth mindset. So, they're still seeing, okay, yep, okay, want to be a pilot, okay, no good at maths. So I guess what we'll have to do between now and then is we're probably going to have to get good at maths, okay? We're probably going to have to grow. If that's the person we want to become, the step we're going to have to take is to get better at maths. We're going to have to learn some more maths. So that's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is very, very fixed, okay? It's got a lock on it. You can't change it. Whereas a growth mindset always has the ability to change, always has the ability to grow. If you really want to make that identity change, you're going to really have to start to get your, inner child to see those things that are currently weaknesses for you, okay? So, in that example, it was the maths. You're going to have to get those weaknesses onto your list of cans. Okay, that's really what you've got to do. Instead of having, pulling out the book and saying, no, I can't do that, I have no confidence doing that, that's it, scratch that, see you later. You need to be able to, pencil it in. Later on, you can come back with, a pen and you can go over it, or, a permanent marker, okay, once you've really become confident at that thing. But instead of disregarding our weaknesses, instead of avoiding them, which we all too often do, we need to make a conscious effort, a conscious decision to get those weaknesses, put them on our list of cans, and start practicing them so that we can become stronger at them. The only way we're really going to be able to achieve that is by getting the inner parent, okay, that inner voice to stop, telling us to stop, okay? Stop telling our child to stop. We need to get rid of that list of musts, okay? We need to train our inner parent to be much more accepting and acknowledge, the things that we want to do and not be so negative. We need our inner parent to give us permission. We really need to train our inner parent to give us more permission moving forward. So moving forward, our goal is to really get that inner parent to be more permissive, okay, to give us permission to do things. And in order to get that to happen, okay, we need to develop this growth mindset. Develop a growth mindset, what we need to do is we need to have focus, but we also need to concentrate on praise and how we praise ourselves in those pivotal moments. How was Group B praised differently? Okay, what was significantly different? Okay, what was actually said or done to the individuals in that group that made them have such a better, outcome? What do you think that is? The inner parent's role is to protect the child from vulnerable feelings such as disappointment and failure. This is why we often feel enormous resistance when confronting our weaknesses. We know that the way to get children to reach their full potential is by changing the communication dynamic they have with their parents and their teachers. Likewise, we need to reprogram the dynamic between our own inner parent and inner child to reach our full potential as well. Research has shown that praising children for things like intelligence creates a fixed mindset. That makes them more resistant, faster to give up, and will regress following the experience of failures. Children with a growth mindset, however, become less resistant, more resilient, and grow stronger following struggles and failures. In the following lesson, I'll show you how to use praise differently in order to create that growth mindset. Not just in other people, but most importantly, a growth mindset within yourself.